Hello, Peter. Good morning.
Good morning.
Uh, it would be nice that if we can have this session, and for which you became ready. We are really thankful. School of Brahma is extremely thankful for being here and having these sessions of yours with our students.
Well, it's wonderful to be here in Kerala. I came in February and had a wonderful time. And it's warm and it's wet, but I'm really loving being here. So thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Now, let me put my first question here. Your international lecturing and teaching experience is quite extensive, having worked with institutions in several countries. What do you find most rewarding about teaching and conducting master classes in performance design, directing, and arts management? I would like to ask more about your experience about all these subjects which you deal with, and how would you describe your design philosophy and underlying principles that guide your creative process?
Okay, so I guess that's critical to what I do, being a teacher. I think that I've now accumulated a great deal of knowledge, being the age I am, and having travelled and having worked in the industry for about 30 or 40 years and taught for 35 years. I've done 150 productions or so, often in Australia, but also internationally. So I've accumulated a lot of knowledge, and I enjoy sharing that with students, not just students, with peers, with friends, with everybody. I'm a walking library in some sense about architecture, music, fashion, painting. I collect art, I collect pottery. I do a whole lot of things that engage me in the creative world. So I guess my philosophy of what I want to teach is, first of all, you have to have a body of knowledge. You have to know what you're talking about. And to know that, you need to have had a lot of professional practice. And I think professional practice informs education in endless ways. So my philosophy, I guess, is practice a great deal. Work with enormous range of people. Explore every facet of what the arts and the cultural life of your country and other countries are. And then you might have a body of work which you can start sharing with students. The students will know almost nothing about what you're talking about for some time, but eventually pennies start to drop and references start to be very meaningful to them, and that they can then speak on subjects that you know well, and they're starting to understand, and then they acquire greater knowledge. So I think it goes hand in hand, practice and sharing of knowledge.
It's wonderful to know that. And like the next question which I would like to ask is, you served as the head of the School of Drama at Management University for over a decade. Can you tell us about your experience in leading and supporting a diverse cohort of teachers, staff, researchers, and students during your time there? As a university professor and head of the School of Drama, Management, how have you prompted equity, diversity, and inclusion in your institution's activities? How did you promote these things? And how have you navigated the challenges of arts funding and philanthropy in the context of your role as a head of drama school and as a designer for various productions? It's quite a big question.
That's a handful.
Yeah, but I think just how did you keep teachers and everybody together?
Well, I think leadership is everything. You spend your whole life accumulating experiences, working with challenging, difficult, charming, entertaining people. You have to be a very good judge of people to be a leader of an institution. You need to be able to look at somebody and say, I can see this in what they're doing. I can see they have these qualities. If I were to help them to do this, this, and this by professional development, maybe that will enhance their teaching skills or their practice. So I think, first of all, you need to be a good listener. You need to be fair. You need to be supportive. You need to be collaborative. You certainly need to be decisive, and I think ultimately forward-thinking. All institutions travel like this until somebody stops having ideas, in which case that happens. If you're a leader, you have to be thinking, what is the next thing that's coming around the corner, so that the institution is always traveling up. It never, stasis only means you're going to go down, so you have to be careful of that. I like to think that I'm non-judgmental. I used to be judgmental as a young artist. I used to be very judgmental. And then over time you realize that that's folly. You have to take the situation that you're presented with and do the very best you can with it. And be positive and find a positive outcome. And infuse people with positivity, because that ends up a much more joyous environment, I think, to work in than somebody who's a bit sort of questioning everything. Knowledge is a very powerful tool. So the person who has the most knowledge and understanding of a situation will probably be a fair judge of the situation. And then awareness of past practice, I think, is very important. What has happened in the past in the discipline that you're teaching? So knowing the world of, say, theatre design, which is one of the things I do, but I'm also interested in the world of art and the world of architecture and music and opera and ballet. So knowing what's gone on throughout history is very important, so that you know what you're doing now is moving the art form forward. You don't want to be just doing the same thing day after day after day. I think diversity, when you mention that, it is probably the most important issue on our agenda at the moment worldwide. I've been working in America for the last 12 years, and after the Me Too movement and the death of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement really revolutionized what were happening in creative spaces. The era of the dominant monster is over. We've all worked with difficult people, we've all worked with difficult directors or managements or artistic directors or cooperatives, where because of their importance in the industry, they can threaten you and they can alter the trajectory of your career. Those days are over. I say that hopefully. It's probably not true everywhere, but I think there is a genuine push, especially in America and Australia, which I know well, to make sure that equity and inclusion and diversity and fairness are part of every decision-making process. So when I was running the school, every play that we chose, every workshop that we held, every studio production that we did, every piece of work that's analysed in a studio with actors or designers, that came under the purview now of a sort of diversity lens. So where we might have just said 20 years ago, we'd do 12 Shakespeare scenes, now we say, well, why are we doing Shakespeare? Where are the African American plays? Where are the Latino plays? Where are the Indian plays? Where are the Malayalam plays? I mean, we need to make sure that we are being inclusive. And I don't think we were doing that, and that's what led to the important revolution that came with Me Too and the Black Lives Matter movement. I think a very important thing about leadership is developing opportunities for people to learn wider and deeper and at a greater maybe a level of achievement, being supported by the institution that they work for. I mean, once you get into a job, you know what it's like. You can sync with the amount of work that there is. And at the back of your mind, you're thinking, I wish I knew more about Russian textiles, or I wish I knew more about photography in Argentina, or whatever it is. And if you're given those opportunities, you blossom, the institution blossoms, and I think that the students and the community benefit greatly from it.
Like when you're saying inclusive and also diverse, do you think this philanthropy and funding becomes more easier in such a situation? Because that's something which in the institution we have to constantly keep trying.
Well, there are various approaches. So I've had two deep experiences in my life of fundraising and supporting institutions. One in Australia, where we built a new complex for the National Theatre School. And then when I was in America, but the Australian school was funded by the national government. So there is a secure funding that comes into the school. In America, I was in a private university, and they have to fund every dollar themselves, which leads to exorbitant tuition fees and the reliance on philanthropy. But the Americans are good at philanthropy. They want to give back to their institutions because they're proud of them. So if you ask any American that you first meet, hello, I'm Peter, they will say to you, where did you go to college? Because it's very important to them of what your background is, what your education is, what your training might have been. And then, of course, there's all the prestige elements which come into it, which is not so good. So diversity, once you start opening up the diversity envelope, then you're including a whole range of people you have never thought, may be interested in your institution. So it's of value to everybody that the more diverse the crowd, the more diverse the participants, the more diverse the board membership, the more diverse the governance of a university, then they're bringing more people to the table. They're making greater offers for young people, irrespective of their backgrounds, which can only be good for the university. The community sees that, and the community wants to support that, and therefore funding might follow, or philanthropy might follow. So I think it's a win-win situation.
Okay. Now, you have an impressive career as a designer, educator, and art administrator. How did you get started in this field? Something which I'm deeply interested in. What inspired you to pursue a theatre and opera design career? How do you see the intersection of art, philosophy, and work as a designer and educator? Because this is something, one is your career as a designer, and also one being educator. And what was like, I would really love to know your childhood memories or something where, how did you come into something like this?
So my family, my father was a journalist, and my mother a housewife with 4 children, but she was a pianist, and a very good pianist, and she eventually became an accompanist for the ABC orchestras in Australia. And my father went on to have a diplomatic career and ended up at the United Nations. So we had a very rich household environment. But I remember 2 things. I remember a recording of Aida that my mother had with Renata Tebaldi, an old 33 disc, and we would play it just endlessly over and over and over, and a recording of La Boheme. So maybe from the age of 3 or 4, we were starting to hear opera in the house, and certainly the piano was being played every evening. This is before television and all those things. And so that we were surrounded by that. Then I went to boarding school where there was nothing. There was football and cricket, and there was nothing. But I decided, there was one piano in this very grand old boarding school I went to, and it was above the rowing shed. So all the boys would be downstairs rowing and doing all their tough stuff, and I'd be upstairs playing the piano. So I guess I was interested in that. But my whole focus through school was I was going to do medicine, and I was being lined up to do medicine. My parents said, oh, this is our future doctor. Like parents do. And up until the day I was accepted into university, up until the day I should have signed the piece of paper, I decided I didn't want to do that. I had been working backstage in a theatre in Canberra, just sweeping the stage and being a rouseabout backstage to earn some money in the holidays. And various national theatre companies would come, like the Melbourne Theatre Company and the Australian Opera, the Australian Ballet, Margot Fonteyn, Nureyev came. These great, Tyrone Guthrie brought a wonderful production of All's Well That Ends Well. So I'm 16, standing backstage with a broom, and on stage are these wonderful, wonderful actors, dancers, musicians, and I knew from the standing in the wings that that world out there is the world that I wanted to be part of. And I ran away to the theatre. My parents were furious, and they were shocked. And they didn't really speak to me until I got my PhD, where then they were so proud of me. And they came to every production, and they said, that's my boy, he's in the theatre. But it took a long time. Yeah, it takes a long time to have success in the theatre. And you never know whether there is going to be success. And I must say, when I started, I had no idea the difficulty I was taking on in trying to have a career in the theatre. I just thought you went to school and then you sort of went into movies or something like that. And it was naive and immensely stupid. But I never have ever wanted to do anything else. And one way or another, success came my way. So there you have it.
Okay. But what about then educator?
As an educator, so what was the question of that?
It was like you came into as practicing into art,
yes.
And then from practitioner to educator.
In Australia, it's a very small pool. So I was living in Sydney. There was half a dozen theatre companies, one opera company, and state opera companies and theatre companies. I had been working for about 15 years as a freelance designer in opera and theatre all over the country. I'd been to London, I'd had a degree of success, but I could see that I was also interested in what was going to happen next to myself and the students who were coming behind me. So I wanted to be involved in a theatre educational program, and the boss that was the head of the school, like you are here, invited me to apply for a position of head of design, which I'd never ever considered, and I'd never taught anything in my life other than being a student. Anyway, I applied for the job and I got the job, and I was nearly ill every day for 3 years after I got the job because I thought, can I even do this? And in my first intake, I had future Academy Award winners, Catherine Martin and Angus Strathy, were in my first intake. And so I was dealing with these extraordinarily clever students. I was close to their age because I was just 32 and they were in their late 20s. So there wasn't a big gap between us. But I knew as soon as I started imparting knowledge in the classroom that it was something that I was going to grow to be good at. And touch wood, that panned out.
That's very nice to know. Okay. Now, throughout your career, you have designed over 100 theatre, opera, dance, musical, and special event productions. Is there a particular production that holds a special place in art? If so, why? In your opinion, what role do theatre and opera play in shaping society's values and beliefs? It's like, do you have any particular memory of a production, and do you think those memories or anything which helps shaping society's values and beliefs, or these are all different?
No,
an artist's favorite may not be the change for a society.
That's right.
Society may value something else of your creation.
And that's exactly what I feel. So the thing that sticks in my mind, I've done, as I say, 150 large things, big productions. The one that sticks in my mind as a turning point for me was a production of Mozart's Così fan tutte for the Australian Opera. And it's a turning point because I started backstage, as I just said, watching an opera with a broom. I'm sweeping the stage and watching an opera on stage. And through the process of being educated and then making my way out into the profession and meeting people and people liking me and liking what I did, I slowly made those painful steps up the ladder of a career, to the point that I was commissioned by the Australian Opera, after 10 years or so out of school, to design a production for the Sydney Opera House. That's about as good as it gets in Australia, that you're designing for the biggest company in Australia. You are at one of the iconic buildings in the world. And luckily, I was asked to design this for John Copley, who was then the resident director of Covent Garden. So I go from being backstage with a broom to doing this opera Così fan tutte. And if you know the opera, it is about two men who are deceitful of women. And they plot and plan to deceive the women that love them by masquerading and doing tricks on the women. And it was Mozart's sort of assessment of the world in which he was living, in that women were very secondary. They could be toyed with, they could be taken down the wrong path, they could be underestimated. And it's only years some years after that I worked on it so hard that I reflect on it and think, it's such an opera of our time that, we take so many things for granted. And Mozart was taking these women in this opera for granted. But I think we just have to bring fairness and equity to everything we're doing. And I'm not sure that I would want to do Così fan tutte again, because of the subject matter is now not to my taste at all. But it was very important to me when I did it.
Okay, so, but do you think that that's one of the points for societies, like having that intervention of values and beliefs?
I do. If you think of the world of ballet, women are on their toes in ballet. They're crippling themselves up on their toes doing point work. And the audience is clapping, watching somebody doing something that is against every physical attribute a body can have. And it's in all disciplines. It's in kathakali, it's across all the great disciplines. Opera, you're making your voice vibrate at a level that is eventually going to cause damage, which is why opera singers stop singing. That it's a high wire act performing. And I do think the audience, you can be enormously influential in the world of opera and ballet, in the stories that you tell and the way that you tell them. So one of the best theatre companies, dance companies in the world is now the indigenous dance company Bangarra in Australia, which is bringing all of the 60,000 years of Aboriginal life, which has been ignored by the white community of Australia since Captain Cook arrived, and they're bringing all of that onto the stage, and they are now the premier dance movement company in Australia, and maybe in the near Pacific, and maybe on a world level, hugely recognised and admired, because they're putting on stage the extraordinary history and values and dreamtime experiences of the oldest living culture on Earth that has been there for 60,000 years continuously. It's remarkable.
Now, let me come to a different role of yours. As a member of various advisory boards for theatre programs in the USA, what insights can you share about the challenges and opportunities in theatre education today?
Well, first of all, in America, there's 2,500 places you can study theatre. In Australia, there's probably about 20, if you take the universities and the theatre schools. In America, there are 2,500 places that have a drama department like this, maybe not as grand as this. So there is this enormous opportunity to become involved in theatre education. The major drawbacks, of course, are cost. So in America, you can pay anywhere between $35,000 and $75,000 at one of the premier schools for 1 year's tuition, $75,000 US dollars. And it's a 4-year course. So it's very difficult. On the other hand, the American system does have financial aid. So depending on your parents' income, you will be supported by the university to a certain amount. Never quite enough, of course, but it does help people who have financial hardship get into university. However, that just means getting in the door. So you might be coming from a small town and suddenly you come to a big city. You have to pay rent. You have to find somewhere to live. You have to get used to a big city, transport, all those things. So it's not only the relocation costs, it's the daily costs and wear on you being in New York City or Chicago or LA or Sydney or Melbourne or Delhi or Bombay. These are very, very, they're challenges. But the American system, once you get in, it is a fantastic educational system. I mean, the schools are remarkable. And the 2,500 places, of course, generate so much work for people who come out of theatre schools. So all of these theatre schools have to have a head of acting, a head of design, a head of lighting, a head of sound, a head of costume, a head of photography. So there are enormous employment opportunities as well. but the cost, I think, is one of the most difficult things. What we did was we used to go into underprivileged or communities that just didn't have any theatre experiences or for their students. And we would go to those schools and say, hey, have you thought about sound design? Do you want to be involved? If you come to us, you could do sound design for us, and then you go out and make recordings of your friends who are putting their bands together. So a lot of people don't even know that this is a possible route to have a career in America, which is divided unbelievably between those who have some money and opportunity and those who don't. And most schools, I think, have a policy of going to communities of need and trying to find students to say, if you come to us, we'll help you financially, and then maybe there's a career path down the track.
Also, can you share some insights, the curriculum development process there for performance design, how you sought to stay relevant and innovative in the curriculum design?
Well, at the school that I was at, Carnegie Mellon University, we had an ongoing assessment of what's going on. The students are put in after every class. They are required by the university to write down what they thought of the value of the class, what they thought of the teaching, what they thought of the preparation of the curriculum, all of those sort of things. So the student input is coming back into the school all the time. There's a regular curriculum review with our faculty, and we met every week to talk about what's going on within the school. Then every 5 years, every theatre school, major theatre school, has an external review committee. It's called the Presidential Review, and experts would come from Yale or Princeton or Harvard or wherever, and they would spend 4 or 5 days in the school speaking to all the students, speaking to all the staff, speaking to all the faculty, reviewing what the productions are like, and then they would feed back. They'd write a report like that, and you would get this feedback saying this school needs better equipment, it needs better photography, it needs better whatever it was. You must work harder to improve these aspects of what's going on. But curriculum was a major focus of that.
Your contributions to the performing arts and education were recognized with prestigious awards and honors, including the Order of Australia. How did these recognitions impact your career, and what advice would you give aspiring professionals? How do you balance your academic commitments with your professional design work, and how do these two spheres complement each other?
Well, I think as we both know, all artists subsidise the discipline through their time commitment, their passion, their interest in it, and that's worldwide. So I'm sure you at this school put more time in than anybody, maybe their daytime job, if they were a dentist or if they were a lawyer or something like that. It is a passion that that infuses every decision you make, and you just give of yourself to the theatre. To be recognised is obviously always, a pleasurable experience because it comes from your peers. You have no idea you're going to... I received 2 Orders of Australia, the lower one and then the higher one. And I didn't know anything about it. But everybody you know is being interviewed, saying, what's Peter Cooke like? Is he worthy of this? Should we really give this to him? And then you get a letter from the Governor-General, who is a representative of the Queen, saying you are going to be honoured with this award. So it's a very big thing. But I would say you need to only ever remain focused on your art. If you're chasing an award, or if you think there's something at the end of the rainbow, forget it. The only way to get there is by diligent hard work, by really committing yourself to your art. And if at the end of the process, a body of people saying he's very good at it, he deserves this award, so be it. If they never say that, and that's the case for most people I know never get awards, but they have a very fulfilled life. So the award is just icing on the top of what must be the only thing in the world you want to do is the theatre. If you have any other thoughts, go and do it. But if this is what you want to do, then commit fully to it, and maybe down the track something nice will be given to you.
Very much.
With arts boards, I've been on many arts boards and panels now, and I have had full-time work as at theatre schools now for 35 years. I've decided that I don't want to do administration anymore. I've done that. And what I love about that is the freedom of going back now and being a teacher and an artist and a painter and a creator. And that's what I do. And I collect art, I collect pottery, I do a whole lot of things. And I like drawing, I like painting, I submit portraits for prizes and things. So I'm back being the artist that I guess I started at all that time ago. But through my experiences, I'm a trustee of NIDA, the National Theatre School of Australia, and I do advisory panels, and I chair fellowship meetings and teach. And I want to do more of this. I love traveling the world and meeting new students and faculty and, sharing what knowledge I have.
Okay. So now let me come to one of your works, which is one of your notable roles was heading the design team responsible for the flag handover ceremony at the Atlanta Summer Olympic Games in 1996. Can you describe the creative process behind designing such a significant event?
Well, I guess everybody knows what the Olympics are. And so you're dealing with something on a very large scale. At the Olympics, there's this thing called a handover ceremony. Whichever the city that's going to do the next games is responsible for staging a flag handover ceremony at the current games. So when the Olympics were awarded to Atlanta, Sydney was going to be next in the year 2000. So we were asked to do the handover ceremony in Atlanta through this process. There was an international tender. So every design group who were interested in major large-scale events tendered for this. And people who'd done Barcelona and Beijing and all these other things, they were in the pool. So I asked 3 students and a graduate, and I said, let's put together a tender. Everybody said, oh, don't be stupid, they're never going to use you. And so we worked for about 9 months. Every Sunday, we went into a studio like this, after all our classes and things, and we worked for a year, it's 9 months, designing what a ceremony could look like before a director was appointed. So we were envisaging the whole thing ourselves. And that went to the Sydney Organising Committee of the Olympic Games. They reviewed all the tenders. We got a phone call one day saying we had got it. Wow. So there's 3 students and me, a graduate and we are designing for the Olympic Games. So about 9 months later, all of those things were built and arrived at. The most important decision being made was that the appointment of Stephen Page, an Indigenous choreographer, was going to be the director of the event. So for the first time, this major international, broadcast, 3 billion people watch it, was going to be a group of NIDA designers, me and Stephen Page, this wonderful Indigenous choreographer. So we worked on that together after we'd got the go-ahead, and we came up with the show. And then we went to Atlanta and we did the show in the middle of the closing ceremony in front of 75,000 people. And the students and I were in the field as this huge opera house that we designed, inflated and blew up, and was beamed around the world. And interestingly, that night was the very first night I'd ever used a mobile phone, because everybody was ringing me saying, congratulations and all that sort of thing. And I said, can I speak to them? And somebody passed me a brick about this big, which was a mobile phone. And that's the first mobile phone I ever used.
This is 1996, I think, no?
Yep.
So let me how do you believe large-scale events like Olympics contribute to international relations and diplomacy?
Well, it's such an important field. I think what you do in our world is we're interpreting what we do, a play, through the lens of our own experience and our own country and our own people often. So if you're doing Hamlet, you're thinking, well, who is Hamlet in the Australian setting? Who is this, indecisive, senior heir to something, cattle station, heir to, a political dynasty, heir to whatever. And so you're looking at that through the lens of your own country. I think diplomacy comes in when you start to travel and you start to interact at conferences, you come to schools, you go to festivals, and suddenly you're putting your work before somebody and they're putting their work before you, and you see what Mexico thinks about Hamlet, you see what Kerala thinks about Hamlet, you think all those sorts of things. So there's an exchange of ideas, which I think is terribly important. The more you travel and the more you meet people from different experiences. I think it also informs your work enormously, in that you've lived in this pool all your life and suddenly you see what's going on in Russia, you see what's going on in France, you see what's going on in Belgium, you see what's going on in Brazil, and you think, there's a big world out there and a lot of people are doing exactly what we're doing. They're sitting here being interviewed about their work, but they happen to be in Terra del Fuego or they happen to be in Botswana. But they are all doing similar things. And I think we can get bound up thinking, oh, we're very good at doing theatre. And that's simply silly. Theatre is just what's happening out here every day. Life is theatre. So the more that you get out and see each other's worlds, invite each other in. I think through my relations now in India over such a long time, I've got friends across the country who are now married, who've got kids, they've got grandkids. I know about their worlds, I know about their work. We're friends, I've sponsored them, I've been referees for them for positions, scholarships, fellowships. There's just this interaction that just naturally happens. When I came here the first time in February, I walk around the school on the first day of the festival and people are saying, hello, Peter, sir. And I think, oh, where are you from? And they say, oh, we met in so-and-so, or we met at Delhi, or we met here, or we met there. So suddenly you're part of a bigger community and they're getting aware of what Australia is and we're getting aware of what their world is.
Okay. So you have been involved in various community and university service activities. How do you balance your commitments to the arts and your contribution to community and education institutions?
Well, I think arts leadership requires a division of time and focus in order to balance professional experience and educational commitments. Respect, I think, is just critical to any of these things. Representation and cultural diversity in both the classroom and theatre are just essential. So I think, as my role as the leader of the theatre school in America, I brought about this program where we said we were in a very posh university surrounded by a lot of high schools that were in need, and there were some very poor communities around us. So I said, we had unbelievable facilities, wonderful theatres and spaces and things. I said, let's open these up to these schools. So I had a very good faculty member who used to bring in a group of students and do classes free, just bring them in and start a theatre program for them. We did a whole series of performances for free for the local community, bring them in by bus.
So that's how you connect local community?
Yes, so they would come in, we'd do the show, then all the actors would meet them afterwards on stage. The kids would then tour and look at everything on stage. I remember the very first performance we did was of Richard III, 3 hours of Richard III, Shakespeare. And these kids who are like 12 to 16 come in buses, they're all screaming and having ice creams and stuff. I thought, this is going to be a disaster. They're going to talk through the whole play. The lights went down, Richard III started, and it was like a pin drop. You didn't hear a single thing ever until interval, when there was pandemonium. And I was in the theatre afterwards with these young people, often African-American, Latino kids, and saying, did you understand who this character was? Oh yeah, I got that. And I mean, they were wonderful. So that they were completely on top of the story and the tale. And from that, we became friends. So they would send me emails, hey Pete, I'm the head of the school. Hey Pete, come and see this. We've got a show on it at wherever it was. And I'd go and see it. And they'd be amazed that I turned up. But I love those things, and it just opened doors to people. Why not?
Now, the arts and theatre design field has slightly evolved since you started your career. How do you keep up with the latest trends and innovations in the industry? How do you balance artistic creativity and individual expression with the need to engage with broader cultural and societal themes in your design?
Well, I think practice and teaching go hand in hand. I mean, there's no use teaching something if you haven't been doing it, or you understand it, or you're exposed to it. You don't have to be playing Hamlet on the National Theatre stage, but if you attend it and you see it and you know the actors, you know the performers, you know the director, you're engaged in that world, you can inform your students if you're a teacher in London. I see a great deal of things. I go to everything. So I might be out 3 or 4 times a week seeing everything that's on, from music, opera, concert music, chamber music, the whole thing.
How do you envision the future of performing arts education, considering the evolving landscape of technology and globalization?
Well, because you're dealing with, as a head of a school like you are, I had 30 faculty and 300 students every day coming to me saying, we need this camera because, Steven Spielberg said this is the best camera in the world to do this with. So I think, okay, we'll buy one of those. You've got this input from this enormous body of people, 350 people every day, you know exactly what it's like, telling you what they want, why it would be better for the school, what the future's going to be. I was in touch with agents and managements and studios in America all the time. They're writing to me and talking to me and emailing me saying, have you got this sort of a character? The next season of Netflix shows is going to involve quite a few Chinese, Malay, something. Do you have any of those people coming through your program? And you could see that, this basically white program was changing over time as Netflix and the streaming services and the broadcast and movies were saying, we're sick of all those white people just only on stage. We want now mixed casts which, bring in so many wonderful stories. So you're keeping in touch through professional relationships, practitioners on faculty who are coming back from theatre companies that they've been working with saying, the Goodman Theatre now has this sort of projection season, etc., etc. So you do keep in touch.
Now, your career spans different continents, working with artists and students from various cultural backgrounds. What lessons have you learned about cross-cultural collaboration and communication in the arts? Throughout your career, you have taught and conducted masterclasses in various countries. How do you adapt your teaching methods to different cultural and educational contexts? Particularly in this educational context, I would like to further ask that, with your extensive experience designing for different cultures and contexts, how do you balance preserving cultural authenticity and adapting to audience expectation in a globalized world?
So I think no matter where I design or teach, I think the uniqueness of your thinking is the passport to success. Doesn't matter what you're doing, unless you have something unique to say, I think you're just repeating what somebody else might have done. So by having these cultural exchanges and by working across, countries and meeting a lot of very interesting people, you're constantly filling up your reservoir of imagery, of thoughts, of philosophies, of different opinions. And so that can lead to a lot of very interesting work. When it comes to cultural authenticity, everything should be analysed through today's social and political lenses. So if you're doing a play about Indigenous Australia, you have to be unbelievably respectful. I did a huge production of Dead Heart with 6 senior Indigenous actors and 6 non-Indigenous actors. And it was about a death in the desert. But it involved the Aboriginal actors dealing with a lot of unknown to us, white people, rituals and secret men's business, which is just a thing of the cultural life of Indigenous Australians. So these men we had to do this play, and we had to use objects and things to tell the story. So they invited me to see these rare and not to be seen by others, objects that I could then copy to use as props in the show. So I was invited into this mystical, magical, deeply sensitive world of Aboriginal Australia. And I think through that process, Abhilash, the respect I had, which I think I had anyway, just increased enormously when you see somebody deal with something that means everything to them. And it can be a rock of their space where they lived. And that rock is so sacred to them. And they're showing it to you, saying, this is my land, this is my people, this is my beliefs, this is everything that I care about. You change as a person because you become so respectful of everything that somebody might offer you. And I think that was a life-changing experience for me. But I think, we have for years just said, oh, let's take a little bit of Picasso, or let's take a little bit of this, and let's infuse a set design with a bit of, some Andy Warhol or some artist that you think, you just take their work, and I realize now, how insensitive that is. They're artists too, they created it. You can't just pinch it. And so I'm sure you're all going through, with your own Indigenous cultures here, patterns and folk art and painting styles and things. You can't just appropriate them and put them on stage. Either you use the artists themselves, you invite them into the process to help you understand it, or you get them to create it for you. And that then gives opportunity and opens up another world to these Indigenous aspiring young artists. And that is happening in Australia more and more. So having lived in America for 12 years, when I came back recently, every single ceremony, every event now opens with a welcome to country ceremony, where you say, I am grateful to be on this land that is owned by so-and-so and so-and-so and so, whichever group. And that is now completely the form in which every event takes place in Australia, which is new.
Peter, recently you were invited by the Currency House, the home of arts debate, in which you discussed your thoughts on establishing an Australian International Cultural Agency akin to the Goethe Institute to foster lasting cultural relationships with Asia and the Indo-Pacific, considering Australia's position between China and the US and the growing need for soft diplomacy in the region. Is this initiative potentially neo-colonial, or can it be a respectful and inclusive approach to promoting Australian culture globally while upholding the First Nations first principle from your new cultural policy? How do you propose presenting Australian culture to the world in a culturally sensitive and representative manner that embraces the diversity within our nation? With that, I would also like to know, could you please share your insights regarding the relationships, dynamics between the US and USSR and the various post-colonial nations during the Cold War, taking into the recent account, research on cultural aspects and financial support?
Okay, so that's a big question. So I was asked to speak on my soft diplomacy roles, I guess, from coming to India now for 20 years, it will be next year, of working with young people in various schools, including down here now in Kerala and at your terrific school. And when I reflected on it, I think it's very hard to identify what the positive aspects of interpersonal relationships are, to qualify, what that meant to somebody. There are things that you can say, we met each other, we invited each other to come to each other's countries, we shared information. They're important things that happen in soft diplomacy. I think the more important ones for me was when I leave a place, when people contact me afterwards and want to continue a conversation or a friendship or a relationship, that's very important to me. So it means that something happened in our time together. We didn't just meet and separate and go, that was it. We met and something happened in the exchange. So what I was interested in is how we can get more and more both practitioners and students and creators to be traveling, to be interchanging ideas and, just interacting on the world stage. And then I thought about the Alliance Française and the Goethe Institute. And these are two, very well-known government-sponsored institutions that have buildings and places around the world, especially throughout Asia and the subcontinent, where people who want something from Germany or want to go to Germany or are interested in a certain artist from Germany, that they can go to the Goethe Institute, and the Goethe Institute might provide funding, might provide access, might provide connections, so that you've got a place where you can go. Because what I found teaching in Australia for a long, long time was students would graduate and then have no real idea of what the next steps would be. How do they get out into the world stage? How do they take something that they've got and go to the Edinburgh Festival? How can they get a production and bring it to Kerala, to your International Schools Festival? So I was hoping that Australia, in my talk that I gave to Currency Press, I proposed that Australia establish that sort of government body, and independent of government though, because often you might be taking a work that the government doesn't like.
Yes.
And so it needs to be independent of government, so an artist can come and say, I want to talk about land rights in Australia and I want to take that to the world. The government may or may not want that. But if it's an independent body that can say, well, these are the people that you could go to. These are all the places. You come to Serendipity, you can go to Kerala, you can go to, there are festivals all over the world. You can take stuff. But there needs to be some conduit where people can go to and find out what's going on. I now get a lot of Indian students saying to me, where are there scholarships that I can get to go to an American university or an English university like you went to and I went to, and we were privileged to go. And it changed our worlds, I'm sure. So I've now got my own list of things that I give out to students to say, if you're looking to America, these are the places I recommend. If you're looking to London, these are the places. If you're looking to Germany, these are the places. But I think Australia needs that sort of body that brings together all that information. So a student goes one-stop shop, like a medical centre, and you say, what do I do about passports? What do I do about health certificates? What do I do about this? And critically, where is funding to help me get away? Because one world, is everybody says globalization is changing the world. It's very hard to be global when you're a solo artist in Sydney. You can put it online, but it's lost in the internet, but if you want to get yourself out there, people have to see your work. And so I was very interested in that, I guess.
Could you also please share your insights regarding the relationship dynamics between US and USSR and various post-colonial nations during the Cold War, taking into account recent research on cultural aspects and financial support? I mean, there was a time when there was support from USSR and from US and
we have had, when I was in America, it was very interesting that we had great relations with the USSR. So we were taking exhibitions to Moscow. We had wonderful exchanges between Moscow and us and the Prague Quadrennial. So there was a very fluid interaction, all because they had visited us, we had become friends, they had opened up opportunities for us. Also, we had Carnegie Mellon had a program with the Moscow Arts Theatre where we had a 2-year program, 1 year in Moscow, 1 year in Pittsburgh for graduate actors. So our faculty, our senior faculty, would go to Moscow with a dozen actors. They'd put on a production. They'd come bring that production back from Moscow to Pittsburgh and stage it. And that program was taken over by Harvard. so they pinched it off us. But there was a fluid exchange there because it was set up before me. Somebody had made contact. So I had made contact with you at the National School of Drama in Delhi, and our relationship has continued now for 20 years. But it's only because we met each other and liked each other. If we hadn't liked each other, none of this would be happening. So I think the USSR was very willing to be associated with us, I don't know now. I think that might be a challenge just at the moment.
That's wonderful to know. And it is important to know each other.
Yeah.
That's how the exchanges go. You have been visiting now. The next question is that itself what you have been saying. You have been visiting India for over 20 years now. I'm curious about your thoughts on Indian arts, theatre and cinema. Additionally, you have been taking design classes at the National School of Drama in New Delhi for a similar length of time. What motivates you to keep returning to the school for so long?
So I didn't know anything about India when I first came. I knew about India, but I didn't know really anything about the performing arts here. And I was asked to come here by the head of the school in Australia. And I came and I did some classes at the National School of Drama. Then I was invited to do a production of the Trojan War. And I think it was that production of the Trojan War where I was the designer, costume set designer, but I had students who were helping me with costumes and set and props and all the areas. So I got to know them very well. We were working together every day, and I was in Delhi for 6 weeks. So it was a long stay, and I was running all over Delhi, finding props and finding fabric for costumes, having things made. The tailor who did the Indian cricket team did Agamemnon's suit. So I found all these wonderful, wonderful people. But I got to know Delhi, the markets. I'd be in Chandni Chowk. I'd be everywhere, finding just that right thing that I needed. And I just saw this remarkable city and this unbelievable, fabulous culture where you can get anything you want. There's everything in the world is in Chandni Chowk market. There is nothing that you can't get. And so I was thrilled by that. And then I was invited the next year to come back and work with a very interesting, progressive, sort of a slightly anarchic director called Royston Abel. And we did a production, an adaptation of the Oresteia. Similar experience. I did the set and costumes, and it was fabulous to do. And then I just I was being invited back. And I'd come for a short time. I was very busy in America and wherever I was doing. So I could maybe come for a week, maybe come for 2 weeks, maybe come for 3 weeks. But it was very short, sharp shocks. But it seemed to add to the students' education. Now that I'm free of the administrative roles, I can stay for longer. So I'm here for 10 weeks this trip, and I'll be at 3 different universities. And I love going to different places, meeting new people. There's a photographer looking at me here who I've never met before, but it's always interesting to meet somebody who's working in India and living a life in this exotic country. So I just find it intoxicating, and that's why I come back.
Thank you. So now the next question is a bit long. I'll read the whole thing and then I'll make it into a nutshell also for you, because it is important to read the whole thing so that it gets into the content. I'm curious about the success of your past students in Hollywood, specifically Catherine Martin, 3 Academy Awards, Deb Riley, 3 Emmy Awards, Michael Wilson, Academy Award nominee, Fiona Conley, Academy Award nominee, Kim Barrett, Academy Award nominee, Julio Hindi, Emmy Award winner, and their involvement in theatre. I'm interested in more than just a general statement such as theatre is their life or theatre is their first love. In India, it is common for people to use theatre as a way to enter the film industry. Some theatre artists may switch to cinema after a long time in theatre due to different circumstances, but are expected to give back to theatre community. With technology advancing rapidly, how separate should theatre and cinema be, and how can cinema help and support traditional and contemporary theatre communities? In India, we lack national theatre for various reasons. Or probably we are in an advantage that we don't have a national theatre. And we don't have a national industry for theatre, like in the United Kingdom, Western or United States, Broadway. In Kerala, we have professional commercial theatre. We call it professional, sometimes commercial also. And which runs a professional theatre, but it's not entirely dependent on box office collection. It has a lot of, I think there's also a kind of funding support sometimes they get. Sometimes it's philanthropy also, and sometimes it's being supported by the local communities, local bodies. That's how it runs. And definitely there is a box office, which also keeps them running. Could it be said that there are amateur theatre movements in Canada that possesses a great deal of passion and have a knack for creating productions that not only become widely popular but also have the ability to bring about societal and cultural change? And that's where our student goes in a lot.
Yes.
From here. In this scenario, how do you view the relationship between theatre and cinema in Kerala? So let me make it into a nutshell. It's about students who come and they become celebrities in cinema, but they come to learn theatre. And later, and then the theatre scenario is different. And like in Kerala, it has this commercial professional theatre. And also now what has happened, professional commercial theatre artists also are migrating into TV serials. So everybody has their migration east towards the media, because there's funds, there's fees, there's almost everything which they would like to. And it becomes, the livelihood becomes really difficult in theatre. At the same time, we keep teaching and also practicing theatre, saying that there is a professional theatre and we have to become professional. So sometimes the students keep asking, what is professional? Where is the professional there out there? And the professional theatre in Kerala is something which is highly questionable also, because they only work for money or commercial aspects. And then what we teach here as professional is something which is not only about that. So these are all different kinds of questions which I thought I should put it in, and it has to deal with our curriculum and syllabus, everything, because at the end of the day they have to go out. So how do you see this problem of, particularly with India or countries like India? And also you can start from this Academy Award winner students. Do they contribute something into theatre back?
So this is the biggest question of all for young artists approaching any theatre school. I think everybody comes and says, I want to be in the theatre. They don't really know much about it. And so they're not really aware of what the pros and cons of that means. I think just starting at the beginning, I've had people who've been theatre trained and have been with me at NIDA and at Carnegie Mellon, and Indian students who've come to Australia, who've made very successful careers in the theatre and in film. I think of Dolly Ahluwalia, who was here, who came out to Australia. Bapi Bose was with you, and he came out to Australia. They came back to Delhi, and they both were very successful in Bapi more in theatre and Dolly in theatre and film. My students in Australia have won Academy Awards at a rate that very few schools in the world have. So that went to, I think, and my boss used to say, John Clark used to say, it was the rigour of the training that helped those people build a foundation on which, no matter what came their way, whether it was a ballet that was going to tour in a small country town, or whether it was the Olympic Games, that whoever came through the NIDA program that I had devised was going to be equipped to be able to deal with both scale and imagination equally, depending on what the resources were. So if you think that all theatre is it's telling some tale of some kind, how you tell the tale and the medium through which you tell the tale varies. So streaming is different to film, it's different to TV, it's different to theatre making. What remains the same, though, I think, is the imaginative work going on in the head of the actor, the designer, the director, the whatever, is that you have got to be able to take this thing and pull it apart and look inside it and say, what is interesting about this to me that's personally different to that person over there who's making a choice? And it goes back to what I said earlier in this interview, that individuality and originality are essential. It doesn't matter what you're doing. So Meryl Streep and Cate Blanchett and Robert De Niro, these are remarkable actors because of their voice, their physicality, their look. They're not from the beauty magazine. They don't look like Hollywood posters, but they're great, great artists. You have many, many, many of them in India. So I think what's important when you come to a theatre school like yours and mine is that you can infuse the students with a sense of you have it within you. There's something within you that is unique. It might be your voice, it might be the way you smile, it might be the way you gesture, it might be the way you sit. There's something about you that is unique. So understanding who you are, what your physical attributes are, and what your intellectual sort of processes are, may take you on a very, very long journey. So I think I've had success through students because I'm a very rigorous person, and anybody who deals with me knows that, I will ask the question over and over and over. I can see what you're doing there. Have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? Have you thought of this? And if you go through that process, then you are mining all the way down through a text, a play, an opera, a ballet. That's sort of dealing with with that part of it.
Yeah. The next is like when we are talking about here in Kerala about the professional theatre,
yes, okay.
Commercial, which the professional here is quite commercial,
yes.
And that's why a school like this never looked up to professional theatre.
Yes,
and the school trained the students more to go to the amateur theatre, and amateur theatre does make some changes
yes.
at some point, not always, and professional theatre always carries on with the commercial aspects of it.
Yes.
Sometimes all this can be, a good production comes up in a professional theatre also, and sometimes in amateur theatre.
Yes.
There are many different good productions comes up
yes.
because of the passion and the way they sustain. But then when we stay here in training as professional, and what is professional? And then there's this whole thing of there are actors who have worked for years in theatre, and then they slowly migrate to
yes.
and then they are expected to give back something.
Yes.
And is there any funding issue, or what is it which
yes.
makes it?
Well, I think you come to a theatre school and you have aspirations. And I guess the students who are coming here are coming having seen what they've seen. So if they're from Kerala, they've seen a commercial scene
Yes.
that is of a certain style and certain standard, I guess, a certain commercial viability, otherwise it wouldn't even be there.
Yeah.
And then there are what you and I might regard as theatres that are doing works that aren't commercial, that are just, important works that we believe in, that talk about the human condition in a very interesting way. So you might talk about Goethe, or you might talk about Schiller, or you might talk about Shakespeare, or you might talk about Tagore, or you might, there are so many people that you could talk about, which is different to a commercial theatre. Theatre has to survive. If you think back to Shakespeare, he was putting on popular plays. He had to survive. People had to pay to come in and see it, and he did them one after another and a different one every night. And nobody would ever have thought now you could run a Shakespeare company in Kerala and, do it every night. But maybe you can. I don't know. What I do know is that you need people emerging from theatre schools who have leadership potential, who can say, I think Kerala is ready for seeing a festival of Brecht, seeing a festival of something. And they're going to do it no matter what. And I think back to all the people I know in America, all the people I know in Australia, who started with nothing. They had nothing. They found a church hall and they said, okay, we're going to put on the plays of Arthur Miller. Nobody knew anything about Arthur Miller when I was at school, but all these new plays by Arthur Miller was being staged in small venues. That grows, that body of thing grows, and I think there is a place for it. I don't know Kerala well enough yet to say, what the standard of this is or that is, but I think there will always be people. I can see it in my class now that I'm dealing with. There are people who chirp up all the time saying, oh, I saw this and I think this and I think that, and you think you're a leader. You have whatever it is that you need, you have it. And they will probably go out there and change the world. But you've got to make those things available. So when it comes to funding, I think theatre schools and universities, we have enormous resources compared to the individual artists sitting out there. We always whinge about money, but we have enormous resources. Making that available, that terrace out there, making that available to a group to come and put something on at lunchtime and show a group of students something else is a very interesting way to engage the community and the school. So I just think there's a leadership issue. There's obviously a funding issue. The audience will come. I think if you put on something that's very interesting, the audience will come.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, now the third last question is earlier this year you had an opportunity to attend the first International Festival of Theatre Schools, IFTS, at the School of Drama and Fine Arts, Dr. John Mathai Center, Thrissur here in Kerala. What are your thoughts on School of Drama and Fine Arts, and how do you envision the future of IFTS? You also had the chance to witness the International Festival of Kerala at 4. But first, let us talk about IFTS. How do you see this? Because it's an initiative which has been taken, like you were one of them, Dr. Anuradha Kapoor, and then David Zender, because in a way, like artists, pedagogues, senior pedagogues, and people who are there as the founders of it, and we discussed and we got you all together, and then we started something like this. How do you think now it should go ahead, and what should be the vision and focus of something like International Festival?
Sure. So first of all, I think the fact that you put it on and that you had the energy and the commitment and the drive to do it and rang me up and said, will you come, is invaluable to the institution and to the thing that happened. I mean, you have to have a leader, and you did it. So most people in the theatre are generous. Most people that I've met in my life in the performing arts are generous. And if somebody says, will you come and do something, they will. So I think there's people out there who would love to be involved. I came, I didn't know anything about the school, and I came and I found it to be a welcoming, exciting, dynamic, fabulously located gathering of people. The international faculty were very stimulated and interesting. I learnt from them. I only go to things where I think I'm going to learn something. I mean, otherwise I stay at home. And I went home stimulated by what I saw on stage, by the talks that I attended, by the people I was just interacting with at lunch. So I sat with a whole lot of people from Malaya, from Sri Lanka, from all over the place in the student lounge at lunch or student canteen. And you just learn about something, about life, about politics in Sri Lanka. You learn about all these different things. So I found all that really fascinating. I would love to see it grow. I'd love to see more of the Indian schools. There are other Indian schools in Pune and NSD and Mumbai and whatever. I'd love to know a little more about what the individual states are doing or individual communities are doing. I'd love to see some folk theatre involved. I loved going to the Kathakali and seeing all those things. We sort of knew that beforehand, but I think there's you are ideally positioned. It's south enough, it's close enough to get to from all of Southeast Asia and whatever. I've been to Tonga and I've been to a lot of the Pacific Islands. They've got wonderful theatre communities, wonderful, wonderful theatre communities. Getting them to come here would be so interesting for your students too, from the South Pacific. The Maori theatre in New Zealand is unbelievable, unbelievable. So there's wonderful places that I think the possibility of growing it is great.
Yeah, I want to say this year we are going for a thematics, which is theatre and ecology.
Wonderful.
This is what it is.
Well, South Pacific is, they are sitting there about to be drowned with climate change. All these islands are going to go under. So this is terribly, terribly important to them. And, half of Sydney, all of downtown Sydney will be underwater. There are huge, huge issues. And Australia is taking climate change very seriously because we are now in drought, or we're in flooding rains, or we're on fire. That is Australia. They're the three conditions we're in. So I think ecology is a wonderful thing to bring up, and people are writing about it in wonderful ways. I think it could be longer. I mean, I loved it in a week, but what's important, I think, for teachers and people like us is we want to know as much as the students want to know. So I think seeing other teachers teach is very important for professional development. I think hearing when you heard Anuradha Kapoor or you heard Kirti Jain talking about ideas that they'd brought to the festival. It was very, very interesting. So I think you're doing something marvellous there, and I think, more power to you.
Okay, thank you. What about ITFOK, International Theatre Festival of Kerala this year? You must have seen it for the first time, and it's almost...
So it was, I knew about it, and I knew about Serendipity in Goa. I knew about a number of festivals in India. And I'd been in touch with various curators and artistic directors who are often looking for talent or looking for a company or looking for something that might attend the festival. So I knew of them, but I hadn't been to ITFOK. And following the school festival, it was just a thrill to go down to the centre where the ITFOK was centred downtown, where there were 3 or 4 theatres every night, big arena out in the middle of of a park, and be surrounded in totally packed theatres, packed. Every single seat was packed. Over a week, I went to various productions. And that was thrilling to see literally just the people of Thisha turning out to see productions. It wasn't a glamorous festival crowd. It didn't feel like you were at Cannes or you were in Edinburgh or somewhere like that. It was a festival for the people of this community. And they came in droves, which was fantastic. The price was also dirt cheap, so people had access to it, which was fantastic. The thing I loved most was seeing a Malayalam play about a man who's losing his grip on life by losing his gravity and floating away into senility, I guess. This powerhouse local actor, powerhouse. He could be doing King Lear at the National. He could be doing all these sorts of roles. And he was, naked from the waist up in front of 1,000 or so people, open air, giving this majestic performance of a man losing his grip on life. And sitting, I think I was the only non-Indian person in the audience that night. I was the only white, silver-haired man there. And it was just a really extraordinary experience. So while there was the Type A opera and there was a number of things that were equally, good to see, I thought the fact that you could have a local play with local performers be the star attraction of an international festival speaks a great deal about the quality of the arts in this country, in this community, and the fact that they appeared and were invited, was fabulous.
Thank you. So now, may I ask you, you are currently teaching in SDFA, that is in here, and I know you have also been invited to impart knowledge and expertise to other universities in India, as you have told already. It is a great pleasure to know that you are part of IFT's efforts to share valuable insights with multiple institutions in India. This is something which we thought, as IFT's initiative. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this initiative. Like now you are going to go from here to Sanskrit University in Kaladi and then to Hyderabad. And how would you like to inquire if you have any other ideas that could contribute to this exchange and further enhance the development? Like, should we bring in professors and have pedagogues or theatre practitioners and share people who come into IFTS, and so that this could be also from this year onwards, IFTS we are also trying to bring in this theatre and ecology. We have been thinking of bringing in something known as Parliament of Idea, which is like 3 or 5 invited papers to be read on ecology, and particularly with theatre performance. Because cinema has been doing a lot with ecology. Yeah. The whole Discovery Channel is cinema anyway. But why theatre? Even though theatre was deeply connected with ecology, and there was so much theatre used to take and give back to ecology. So what has happened that in between theatre, somewhere has also got not giving that much back to ecology. And so these are things which we are going to discuss at the same time. That there could be all different discipline of people who can come in and have papers on it. And similarly, we were also thinking to have fellows, IFTS fellows, after this IFTS, they get a fellowship for a year and take this work further in their own regions.
Wonderful.
So this is something which we have initiated this time to the government here, and they have also given us some possible cooperation. So like that, we were thinking of, from the last IFTs, bringing this renowned pedagogues and teachers and theatre practitioners, sharing with all the universities for the students. So how do you think this can develop all these programs?
So I think, yes, the thing that I liked about it was that you had pedagogues and you had people who were thinking about the theatre, so from some academic perspectives, and you had practitioners. And I think that that's important for both. If you're thinking about ecology, you need science. You need somebody to actually lay out what it is we're talking about, because people are vague about it. And so I think you really need some serious scientist who can come and talk about what this is. I had a program in America for playwrights where we attracted funding from a scientific foundation. So the playwrights were paired with a scientist. So, somebody who might develop the COVID vaccine would be paired with a playwright. Somebody who was sending monkeys to the moon was paired with a playwright. Somebody who was talking about the ruinous state of plumbing in London was paired with a playwright. The death of bees across American agriculture was paired with a playwright. And we had this whole series of plays that came about, and it was simply fantastic. So the scientists would get up and talk about why there are no more bees in America pollinating all the harvest and the thing, and therefore food crops disappear. And the playwright would take that idea and then make a play out of it. But the science had to be true. So otherwise it ends up in, fantasy land. So if you're going to do ecology, my recommendation was make sure the science is, first of all, and that there's a great display of, what would happen to Kerala, if the water rose a metre, what does that mean to Kerala? Disaster. And that's what will happen in the Pacific Islands. It only has to rise, 2 feet, and Tonga goes under. That's the end of Tonga. So I think there's that aspect to it. You need academic input to analyse what's being said, because artists can start flying off and get very excitable about their ideas. But then you need somebody to say, well, if that thought's going that way, how do we bring this thought into it too? So the balance of that's important. I like the idea of ecology. I think it's fantastic. It could be a little longer, I thought, because it was hard to get around and see everybody's work. And I would just love to have heard a little more from both the students and the professors.
Wonderful. Now my last question to you. This is, how do you envision the role of theatre teacher in the 21st century, considering the challenges of contemporary socio-cultural and ideological consciousness, state-of-the-art technology, and the increasing number of non-traditional students? Those are transgenders, technocrats, differently abled. And now we also have students who have implanted machines, like you have the heart and other things. So in drama institutions, because you basically work with body also, and when
yes.
you have when you have bodies like that, how do you deal with them? And with the dominance of social media and the need to adapt to a post-truth era, how should the curriculum, syllabus, and pedagogy be redesigned to foster creativity, collaboration, and a new cultural paradigm, while embracing the concept of student-led education over teacher-led education, specifically in the context of Kerala and its rich cultural heritage? How can a drama institution in Kerala shape its educational approach to meet these demands and promote artistic talent in all its respects?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let me start with the idea that student-led education and faculty-led education, and that nexus that's coming on. There's a reason that students go to school. And that's that somebody is going to have knowledge that they didn't have. And imparting that knowledge, however that happens, is part of the education, critical to the educational process. So increasingly, I think there is the student voice saying what they want and what they need and what they don't want and what they don't need. There's always the faculty voice saying you must have. And there's got to be a balance in between. And I think we need to listen to students and make sure that we are seeing the world through their eyes. You know, we've had our world. They're about to embrace a world, and they're seeing it very differently to us. So I think that's extremely important to listen to that. It's easy to squash it, but it's much more important to let it rise. So that's number one. Faculty must be brilliant. Not just okay, they must be brilliant. Because you're dealing with 30 or 40 people, temperamental, challenging, all the different issues that come into a room. And I think people underestimate what the skill of teaching is. That you've got, when I arrived here, I had 15 students, and within 10 minutes, I had to work out where the strengths in the room was, who's got this, who's got that, who's going to be ready to travel this way, who's having difficulty with the language of the play. You've got to be on top of those things. So you've got to be intuitive. Then you've got to be full of information. If you're not full of information, you're no use to anybody. You're just holding the role. So I think students smell that very quickly too. So I think our role as heads of schools has been and is for you finding that teacher who is sympathetic, compassionate, rigorous, and future thinking. So in America, my president of the university said, if you're making a new appointment, by the year 2050, 60% of America will be speaking Spanish. So if you're not making an appointment where somebody is aware or is going to learn or wants to speak Spanish, then that person's not going to be much value to us in 30 years' time. And if you think tenure lasts for a lifetime, if you're appointed at 30, you're going to be there until you're 70. So you've got to make sure that you are looking ahead. So that's the management's responsibility. What might happen in Kerala in 20 years' time? What might happen to this festival? Your festival could become the Edinburgh Festival of South India. You have no idea what's going to happen. But preparing for that is extremely important. Student voice is more complicated. Student voice can come from the right and deserving areas, can come from grumpiness, can come from irritability, or not just getting what they want. And like all families, and a school is just like a family, there needs to be leadership, there needs to be discipline, there needs to be enough support where people will genuinely want to, speak their mind. And I think that's the environment I would pursue. In terms of what happens in Kerala, what was the second part of that?
This is what, specifically in the context of Kerala, which already it has a very rich cultural heritage, a long history. And how can drama institutions Kerala shape educational approach? Because we can't actually neglect it also.
No.
But at the same time, it has its own pedagogy and it has its own way of training, which is coming of hundreds and thousands of years of training, which they have. The system, there is a system there. But then this whole system of education is also training. Is changing.
Yes.
The pedagogy is also changing.
Yes.
So how do we keep all this in balance?
I think the theatre must be made in the time in which you are living. And if you think the Greeks did it by simply bringing the harvest into a place and celebrating it. Shakespeare did it by using natural light, close of the period, very few props, and telling a story to thousands of people standing and watching. Brecht did it. Meyerhold did it. You've got to do it in our time. And if you think the big movements in the last 20th century probably was projection coming into the theatre, the development of musical theatre into the powerhouse it is, cinema, of course. But the theatre, the great champions of the theatre have got a lot to think about, because getting a student to put his iPhone down and go and see a play is a challenge. The cost of theatre is a great challenge. So I do think you've got to be aware of what social media, the attraction of social media. This is an irresistible thing. I find it myself. I'm looking at the phone way too often, and I need to put it down. And students are exactly the same, because we now have access to the whole world when you're sitting at a bus stop. So you've got to deal with that. I've been to some recent productions in America, downtown in Manhattan, where somebody said, get your iPhones out at the beginning of the performance and turn them on, as opposed to turn them off. And so suddenly the whole thing's turned on its head. And we're watching a performance on stage, you've got your iPhone up, there's virtual reality in front of it, and you're watching the performance through virtual reality, and it's fabulous. So that is connecting the zeitgeist that's out there. What all these students are doing, they're all on their iPhones, they can do everything with computers, they've got all of those skills. The theatre can provide, performance and a lot of...
I have done something similar like this.
Did you?
In my classroom.
Yes.
So I used to tell them, put on your phone.
Yes.
Phones. Let's just come in. And then evolve me to exercises through the phone. And whenever I introduce any kind of a topic, I'll tell them, now Google it first and see what is happening. And then I would take up the book which I have it.
Yes.
And now let us read this.
Yes.
And see. And they would go into the hyperlinks also.
Yeah.
But then also, why don't now let us read this book? Because the problem which I'm finding it is that students just don't go into the book anymore. They just read it from here.
Well, the great problem I know, having taught all around the world, is if I say to somebody, look up an Art Deco chair, maybe by Frank Lloyd Wright or something like that, arts and crafts chair by Frank Lloyd Wright. They go and Google it in the USA, they Google it in Kerala, they Google it in Delhi, they Google it in Sydney, they come up with the same chair. If you go to the library and you get a book out on Frank Lloyd Wright, you can see 5,000 chairs. And then you can start deciding which chair do you want. So I love Google because you can get it like that. And I use it all the time. And I love it. When I did my PhD, I took seriously research. And I knew the difference between shallow research and grabbing something and really going deep and finding what a number of people have thought about ideas. So we've got to balance those two things. I mean, technology is not going to stop. And I'm sure we're going to stop. I mean, plays, for example, in the 40s and 50s, plays were 3 hours long. Death of a Salesman is 3 hours long. Most plays now are an hour and a half that I go to in New York. They're an hour and a half, no interval. You're in and you're out. So this change is happening. So writers have got to compress their thoughts. We're so used to getting quick things that we must also get quick on stage. You don't want long introductions. You want to get straight to it. Come on, where is the action of this? COVID, I think, showed us a lot of things. It was terrible COVID. But it taught us to be efficient. It taught us to get clear communication. It taught us to edit very effectively a play, to bring it down to about 40 minutes. And how do you tell that story in 40 minutes? And what parts of that story need to be told. So I think we are going to learn more and more about how to tell stories. The theatre has lasted 2,500 years. It is not going to stop. It will not stop. Every community, every group wants to gather and tell a story. As I drive around Kerala, you can see 4 men standing on a corner. They're telling some story. And that's what the theatre will do forever.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. It was such a wonderful interaction with you, and it was not only informative but knowledgeable also. And I'm definitely sure that we are going to share this, we are going to make it print, and if possible, we'll also relate. Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure to do. Great pleasure to do. Goodbye, everyone.